I'm Brian Reynolds, the chancellor with the Archdiocese of Louisville, and welcome to our podcast series, What's New in ArchLou. This show highlights the people and ministries of the Archdiocese, the Catholic Church in Central Kentucky. Join us each month as we welcome guests to discuss our local church and invite you to get more involved in your own faith experience. This program is brought to you by the ArchLou Podcast Network. We've made it through the hottest part of the summer in June and July to August. Now, if you're from Kentucky, you know the hottest part of summer really actually is August, and they wait till the state fair when nobody can breathe, and they go out there with the state fair, and everybody sweats together. But that's what summertime is in Kentucky. But we made it to August, everybody. We have another exciting show today. This show is about priests and priesthood. And today we have two great guests, Father Tony Smith and Father Cole McDowell. They're both from Bardstown. We'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. Father Cole is our newest priest. Welcome, Father Cole. Just a couple months on the job, right?
Thank you, Dr. Reynolds. Yes, just a couple months now.
Very good. Glad to have you with us. And Father Tony, he's not our oldest priest. He told me I couldn't say that too loud. I should say it repeatedly. He's not the oldest priest.
Close to it.
Okay. But he's long-serving. He's one of our retired priests in the Archdiocese. We're going to get to know these two men and the ministry that they're part of. So let me give you a little bit of background, and then we'll ask them to tell you some more things. Father Cole just was ordained in May and is assigned as associate pastor at St. James Parish in Elizabethtown. Father Cole has an undergraduate degree from Western Kentucky University. He has a graduate degree from Notre Dame and from Theological College in Washington, D.C. Father Tony was ordained a few years ago in 1983 and is currently in residence at St. Patrick's Parish. Following his retirement as pastor of St. Lawrence in 2019, he took up residence there, and he's now, he does what we call supply help. That means if they need him, they call him, and they do all the time. We'll talk about that. Father Tony has an undergraduate degree from Morehead State, a graduate degree from Washington Theological Union. That's a thing you both have. How about that? Okay. And a doctorate from St. Louis University. Father Tony also served for a while in the Air Force. So, in addition to what I've said, let's take a few minutes to have you say a little bit more about yourselves and what brought you here today. We'll talk about priesthood in a minute, but more personally, Father Cole, how about you?
Right. So I grew up in Bardstown, Kentucky, attended elementary school at St. Joseph Elementary, and then Bethlehem High School across the street. So Catholic education was a huge part of my upbringing. And then when I went to Western Kentucky University, that was the first and the only time that I'd been to a public school, which in hindsight, I'm so grateful for that experience to kind of give me some time to be, I don't want to say outside the church, but, outside that realm of influence, that sphere of influence, and to kind of get that outside perspective and to be around more people who weren't Catholic to sort of help me see the church from a different perspective. I'm very grateful for that gift and that perspective in my priesthood, and I had a wonderful experience there, made some great friends who are still a huge part of my life. So that was Western, then went to Notre Dame, discerned that I was called to priesthood, entered seminary. Maybe just a few things about my hobbies. I like running, I like reading, I like cooking. I enjoy music, played some piano growing up. I can read music, and I really love to sing. Sang in choir in my home parish. Love to cantor, and so I try to incorporate singing when I celebrate the Mass, if it calls for that. And so, yeah.
Very good. Yes, I want to. Father Tony whispered there correctly. He's good. Yes. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story about yourself. I was sitting, I think it was your diaconate ordination, which was at the Proto Cathedral in Bardstown, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And someone sitting, and you sang some part of the service, and maybe the entrance to the gospel or something, and someone sat behind me says, "Hey, he's pretty good." So there you go. So you have a following there, Father Cole.
Oh, praise God.
In this situation, always got to give a shout out to your dear mom, who's taught for decades at Bethlehem High School and just retired. So shout out to her because she's a great model of Catholic education.
Yes, absolutely, and she had a huge impact on my life. Obviously, it's a big time for my family because in May she retired. My brother graduated from Columbia Law School, and then I was ordained a priest, and that was all back-to-back weekends.
All right, lots of parties.
Yes, lots of parties. That's
Great.
a great time.
Okay, Father Tony, how about you? A little bit about your background.
Well, you mentioned Father Cole's beautiful voice, etc. When I try singing, even God covers his ears.
Okay.
It's not a gift that I have. So, but no, I'm from Bardstown, born and bred in Bardstown. Fourth child of 13 children, big family. My dad and mom survived the Depression, and Dad was a World War II veteran. So we had the typical education in the Catholic school, the SCNs. And my generation, there was nothing across the street, Bethlehem High School. There was Bethlehem Academy, which is about 2 blocks away. And when we graduated from the grade school, the boys went to St. Joseph Prep, St. Joe Preparatory School, run by the Zavarians behind, which is now part of that property, is now part of the parish in Bardstown, part of the city. And the girls went 2 blocks away to Bethlehem Academy. And the old Monsignor, God bless him, Monsignor Willett, would read his breviary walking up and down the sidewalk, make sure the boys and the girls didn't meet across the street. Different generation.
Yes.
But typical education, my variety of interests. I mean, you were talking about all the things you like to do. I like to sleep every once in a while now, so when you get older.
You earned it, Father Tony.
I earned
it. Father Tony.
But no, I have intellectual, I really, from a very young age, got into this intellectual mode. I want to know things. Not just hear them, want to experience them, etc. So a variety of information and interest in it, but it also, I'm from Bardstown, so kind of that homey type atmosphere. I did a lot of hunting and fishing when I was a youngster, and even still as an adult. My pastor, Father Jeff at St. Patrick, wants one of my bearskin rugs I had. So I said, maybe I'll think about giving that to you in my will. But a different variety, but mainly the education. I like education. I thought I would retire and go back to school for the rest of my life. Hasn't been the case.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that's enough for my background.
Very good. Well, since we want to talk about priesthood, maybe we could ask you both to tell a little bit about what led you to your call to priesthood. They're very different stories, but Father Tony, yours was a while back. You started telling a little bit about it, but how about a little bit more?
Yeah.
What led you to priesthood?
Well, again, as Cole was saying, the whole thing of the Catholic atmosphere of Bardstown, and not just the Catholic, but all the church, whether Catholic or not, is a very important part of that community. My first spark was for vocation was we had some vocational directors come in, Glen Marys, missionary servants, Most Holy Trinity, Trinitarians. Oddly enough, we had no diocesan priests come and give us vocation talks. But I remember in the 5th grade, the Trinitarian priest did magic acts for us, and he basically put a Chinese handcuff on the sister who was teaching us. And I said, I think I want to join that group. But the Glen Marys and the Trinitarians kept up information. Glen Marys finally dropped off. I kept the Trinitarian influence. In prep school, high school, first couple of years there, I thought about priesthood, but other interests came into my life at that time. But then we had another vocation director come at that time frame, and he lit the candle again. And so I joined the Missionary Servants Most Holy Trinity in their seminary in Lynchburg, Virginia. And I was there with that community for about 7 years. And then I began to have some concerns. Took a hiatus away from the community. And fortunately or unfortunately, the Vietnam conflict was heavy at that time. So I was looking to be drafted into the Marine Corps. I joined the Air Force instead, and then served my time in Headquarters Command in D.C. there. But after that military experience, it led me to look more at the issues of morality, war, things of this nature, and got that theological impetus going again, and that intellectual look again. So I came back from military, finished, as you mentioned, some college education here in Kentucky, and then basically went with the community again, because I was thinking about marriage a couple of times, but as my story is, I'm sticking with it. The young ladies did not cooperate, and so I thought maybe God still wanted me.
There you go.
So I went back to, anyway, with them another 7 years, and then we had a little parting of ways because they changed their impetus of their charism. And so I came to the diocese, 82. Bishop Kelly ordained me in 83 at Bardstown as the priesthood in the cathedral.
Very good. Now, that's lots of different steps in that process.
Yes.
There, through the order and through relationships and end up in priesthood. Very good. Father Cole, your story is not the same story, same location and some of it, but tell me about what
It is
what
not,
got you?
and just a few years of difference.
Yeah.
So the beginning of this answer will sound kind of secular, but in hindsight, I realized this was definitely God speaking to me in my life. But in childhood, growing up with some of these major stories that have had a big influence on our culture and big movie franchises, so like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, when I saw these movies as a child, it wasn't the main character, the hero, that I empathized with or wanted to be like. It was like the wise figure in these stories. So like the Albus Dumbledore, the Yoda, the Gandalf. These people who are wise and sort of reveal truth and ultimate meaning in our lives. And so I was looking, in my world, the real world, who is it who does that? And the conclusion I came to, it's the priest. This is who I want to be like. So that sort of initially started up my fascination with priesthood, my interest in priesthood. But then growing up, we've been blessed at St. Joseph in Bardstown, my home parish, with wonderful pastors and priests. They were great role models in my life. So we had, at that time, Father Bill Medley, now Bishop of Owensboro. And we had Father Bill Hammer, one of our best pastors in our diocese. And then an associate pastor who particularly had an influence on me and is now my pastor in Elizabethtown, working under him, is Father Michael Wimsett, who... It was his first assignment as a priest when he came to St. Joseph, and it was the first time in my life I'd seen, a young priest, a very intellectual, joyful priest, and someone who I really empathized with, and so I could see myself in him and in this role, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is something I can actually do. And going on in several years of discernment and through seminary, more and more, I see that it's Jesus Christ himself who's calling me to conform myself to him. And in the context of our culture right now with a lot of toxicity, a lot of division, I just see in him the solution, in his person, in his love, and his sacrifice of laying it all down for us all. This is who God wants me to be, and this is the example of ultimate love we need in this world to bring us together.
Very good. Vocation stories are always so interesting because they are unique, but there's always a couple of things, and you both had them. There's people in the stories who are part of the story through you, and there's a context. And one of the unique contexts about this conversation today is both of you come from the same place. Bardstown is I know you're from other places, other connections and so forth. Bardstown, is the history of this diocese as the roots of our whole archdiocese, which where our roots are. And many priests over this centuries now have come from Bardstown. And I don't think we have a tally of it, but except in the last few years, more priests have come from Bardstown than anywhere else in the archdiocese. Tell me, what is unique about a small Catholic community like that nurtures priesthood? It could be from your own experience, but what do you think about that? Why does that happen?
Sure. I think it ultimately comes down to the relationships, just such a tight-knit, close community, and good, strong family roots, as you mentioned. And it's funny, now as an adult, I can look back on our early Catholic history, and I see these names of these families that came to Kentucky from Maryland. You have Mattingleys, you have Hagans, you have Greenwells. I grew up with these kids in school. I had kids who had these last names, teachers who had these last names. These families are still there hundreds of years later. And so you can just see before you the legacy of our faith, its influence still on us, the debt that we owe our ancestors. And so for my mother's side of the family, they were the Hutchins family, and they were one of the original families to come over. And I can see in my own life growing up just how much family and relationships connected with the education and the faith had a big influence on me. At St. Joseph, on the left side of the proto-cathedral on Sunday mornings, my aunts and uncles, cousins, grandparents, we all sat together in a section every Sunday. So, we were right there as the Hutchins block in the church. And then at St. Joseph Elementary, my great aunt, Mary Spalding, was the principal. At Bethlehem, my mother was a biology teacher, and my Aunt Kathy Clements served in the recruitment office. So, faith, education, family, it was all interwoven together for me. And I think that played a huge role,
the whole environment
in my vocation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. Any thoughts on that, Father Tony?
Well, I'm tempted to say what he said.
That's okay.
But no, the the history of the Bardstown area is fantastic for people to look at that. Again, as I mentioned, its churches are very important, and faith is important, not just to the Catholics, but to all the traditions there. And we had a great relationship historically from the very beginning. If you, folks may remember that the proto-cathedral there in Bardstown, proto-cathedral, is the first cathedral west of the Allegheny Mountains. And it was built not just by Catholics, but it was built by the entire community. Catholics and non-Catholics as well. We had a great tradition of education, as you say, with the good sisters coming in. Bishop Flagey and others helped start some of the communities. Sister Charity of Nazareth, Ursuline Sisters, Lauretines, they were all part and parcel to this filling. I did not realize until my ordination, I had some great aunts, however you call it nowadays, who were from the Ursulines. I did not know they were part of my family, but they were there saying, thanks for being a priest. But all the group, we even had some early Jesuits here.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because of church politics, whatever, they kind of left us. But as I understand it, they left and formed Fordham University somewhere else.
That's right.
We could have had Fordham University here in Bardstown.
In Bardstown, yeah. Okay.
Right. But that whole experience of togetherness, being a small, when I was there, I don't know what the population was when you were there, Cole. I left back in the 60s, but the population was about 6,000 for the whole community. So I don't know if it's still that, but it's a small community. Everyone knows everyone. I would tell some of the fellows who were assigned there, they said, well, you're from there. How do I get the people to accept me? I said, 20 years will do it for you.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it's a community, you have to build it. But it's again, a good example. Again, the priests who were there, Father Joe Batchelor was one of my first associate pastors. I remember Tom Medley, who's left us, but Joe Batch is still now in his 80s right now. I think he's 90 already. So he's up there. But anyway, that whole concept of family, I think, is very in relationships. Very important.
It's in a sense, it's kind of an incubator then of
Yes.
priesthood and faith growth, and has produced many other people for the church and for the community in our cities. But the uniqueness of your two stories, both being as priests from there, is something I wanted to highlight. Let's talk to each of you a little bit separately about some individual thoughts and experiences. Father Cole, I know that in the days leading up to your ordination, that you actually were in St. Peter's Square for the announcement of Pope Leo XIV, the first American-born pope. Tell our listeners about what that was like.
Yes, that trip was a huge blessing and also a huge gamble, but it was something that I really did feel called to do because I had this privileged time, the end of my last semester in seminary, and then before ordination, there was about 3-4 weeks there, and I thought, well, there's not going to be many times in my life where I'm going to have this kind of chunk of time open and when there's a conclave happening. So I wouldn't have to take a break from an assignment or find substitutes or anything. I could just go. But the conclave overlapped with finals week at Catholic University of America. And so I felt called, you should go, really try to make this happen. So when I bought the plane ticket, the earliest I could leave was Wednesday night of that week. And this was before they'd even announced the dates of the conclave. But I found a round-trip flight for $700. And I was like, well, that's kind of a sign from God. Find a round-trip flight to Europe for well less than $1,000. That's pretty good. Then they announced the dates. Conclave starts Wednesday. And it's like, okay, well, they're not going to decide the first day. I'm going to get there Thursday afternoon. It's going to be cutting it close because the last two conclaves were decided in 2 days. A lot of people thought this one would take longer, and so did I. And I wish it had. Turns out it didn't. But I successfully flew into Rome, get there Thursday afternoon. I'm stepping off the train at the San Pietro station with my bag still in hand, and people start running through the streets and they're yelling, Habemus Papam, the white smoke's going up, just as I'm getting off the train. And I thought, oh my God, I've got to go to the square right now. I was going to drop off my bags at the seminary, but it's like, there's no time, and hopefully they'll let me in with these bags. So I rushed to the square, wait in security for about 45 minutes, and I thought, I'm going to miss it. But I get there just in time with about 10 minutes to go. And honestly, the most surreal part of the experience was when the cardinals came out onto the balconies at St. Peter's, because that's when it just became so real to me that, oh my gosh, these guys just literally came from the Sistine Chapel. They've just burned the ballots. And here they are coming out, presenting to the world the person they voted for. And then on top of all that, to be there for the first American Pope in history, I couldn't have planned that.
Well, they waited for your plane to land until you were there.
Right. But I very much think, God was calling me to this. It was just such a blessing. The timing couldn't have worked out better. And so then I had a whole week in Rome that was just gravy, because I'd already accomplished the task that I'd come there for, got to see the Pope, and actually got to see him again that Sunday. And so I could just tour and hang out and spend time with friends at the North American Seminary where I stayed. So just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
That's great. That's a great story. Just a lucky opportunity, providential, historic, all that stuff. Very good. Good for you. I got a second question for you. I don't know if people think about this, and I know priesthood isn't a job, but you had this new job for just a couple of months, these new experience. Tell me, what's the highlights of some of the things that happen when you're just first a priest, like first masses and first confessions and first experiences in a parish staff and a parish? You've been part of the faith community and parish life for all your life, and certainly during your formation years. But now as a priest, what's it been like just the first less than 100 days?
Right. Well, it's a huge transition, of course. One thing that's very astounding is that in seminary, you understand that you're very far down on the totem pole, if not the bottom. You're a trainee. Your job is to receive, to learn, to listen. And now, all of a sudden, after these hands have been laid on you, the oil's consecrated your hands, people care what you think. People are looking to you for advice. People, see you in this position of authority and as something of a role model, I hope. That's a big transition to wrap your head around. Yeah. But it's a great blessing, because, it's Christ in you that they're looking for. And so, our job is to live that out to the best of our ability. I'd say Mass is definitely the highlight of my day. It is the high point, and you feel so much better when you've done that. And celebration within a community, and moving to a new community, my new assignment at St. James, that people just open their lives to you all of a sudden, and people are just so happy to have you. People want to get to know you. All of these things. And then, of course, you mentioned confession as well. That can be a really intimidating thing to walk into, because you can't do it until you do it. We had practicums in seminary, of course, to help prepare us for that. But once you're thrown into it, you don't know what it's like. And the Holy Spirit really does take over. You can fret about, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? What kind of advice can I give? But God works through you. And I've seen that in confession. I've seen that at Mass. And just overall, how comfortable I am to be there. I thought I'd be stressed or intimidated by all of this, but I very much feel this is my calling. I'm so happy to be in this vocation.
It sounds like you've taken it right on very well, and I think that's a great imagery of going from now they want to know what I think and say. That's very good. But also, if you've taken to it so comfortably, that's God's action in your life. Very good. Mm-hmm. Father Tony, help us to learn about priests who are in retirement. You don't retire from priesthood. You retire from some assignments as pastors. So, and I know that's an important distinction, because lots of people confuse that. So I want to hear about that from you. But also, I'd like to know about some things that you do at this time of your life besides helping parishes as needed. One I know is that you've been part of the television radio show called Moral Side of the News, and they've done that for a number of years. That comes from your training in moral theology, I believe. And second, you're on the board or on the committee for the Crusade for Children, which is a very important charity that serves throughout Kentucky and Indiana with lots of care for children in need, and you're part of that process. Those are two, but how do you spend your time? And you can mention those, but also how do you spend your time?
Well, with those two, the Moral Side of the News is made up of priests, ministers, rabbis. We had some imams. We're looking for other individuals. We address the moral issues of the day, nationally, regionally, locally. But another crossover to the Crusade for Children, it is the Moral Side of the News panelists who are on the advisory council to the Crusade, and we are the ones that individuals come to us requesting money.
Okay. You get the grants then.
Right. And just a word, if I may, each year we have, well, for instance, this past year we had about 234 organizations requesting over $15 million from us. Wow. And we get in about 5 to 6 million. So it's the ministers are also the ones who decide who gets what money type thing. One of the best in the nation, as I understand it, as far as social actions. What else we do? Well, someone said, what do you want to do, sit around and watch TV all day? I said, well, I'd like to do that one day a week or something. But no, we're heavily involved, retired, with supply work. That's the main thing. We're helping out here in the Jefferson County area. I help out regularly with about 12 different parishes, and also outside the county, about 6 parishes or so. People calling us 3 or 4 months in advance, can we schedule you for Mass, this, that, and the other. And that's a joy to have. You mentioned the Mass. That is the epitome of our ministry as I see it. Without the Mass, without the Eucharist, what do we have? Nothing type thing. So, but also I continue to do some of the little lecturing every once in a while. My degree is in moral theology, medical ethics, and I was with part of the Catholic Conference in Kentucky for about 15 years. But anyway, the individuals, I'm a resource to some of our brother priests who have issues, moral issues and medical ethical issues, and I do still keep up with some of the end-of-life discussions that go on. Mm-hmm. But the primary thing that I think we do, we are simply available to people. I'm sitting there last night in my pajamas watching the Idiot Box and the phone rings, and somebody needed to be anointed, and Father Pastor is away right now. Associate was available, so even though I'm not assigned to St. Patrick, I'm in residence, they called. So what did I do? I said, give me a half hour to get my clothes back on and get down there to do the anointing, whatever. But it was an elderly gentleman and the families from the parish here, and that's what we're here for.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Archdiocese, the parishes could not operate without the generosity of our retired priests. It's a huge role. Got a couple things I want to ask you, and maybe if you could instruct each other a little bit, because you come from different perspectives. So, Father Tony, as a longtime priest, what are some of the lessons you've learned along the way that perhaps you could share with Father Cole?
Number one lesson I would say to you, of course, the generation of age and history of the church is different, but I would say be open to the Spirit. Because one of the things you mentioned about it's different than being in education. Yes, the praxis of ministry in a parish will not always be like what you've taught in seminary. Right. And so I would say, as one of the pastors said, Father Batchelor, I mentioned his name again, he's my first pastor when I was an associate. He said, when you go in that confessional, when you go to the altar, whatever it is, he said, you rely upon the education you have and the Spirit to guide you. You don't have time. In the ancient history, they had the little booklets they took into the confessional, and they would look things up when people came in. You don't have that opportunity. We don't really need that. Rely upon the Holy Spirit. As the Scripture says, God will tell you what to do and what to say. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'll come out of the sacrament and I'll say, why did I say that? Why did I do that? And the person is saying, you saved me type thing. Yeah. It's just amazing. But the whole thing, be open to the Spirit. There's also a couple more points. The educational bent, instructional bent I have. A book published years ago, Richard Gullo, Reason Informed by Faith. Reason is not the key to everything, even though it's intellectual, science, etc. Faith has an extremely important part of that, but also faith has to be reasonable, according to St. Thomas Aquinas. So it's a mating of the two, if you would, there. And also I would say, this is my own little bugaboo, but I would say, if you would, nourish what's called a hermeneutic of suspicion. I don't know if you were in theological principles, okay? But you would always, sometimes the guys, older and younger, we have it, this is the way it is to be, and never shall change. No, change is part of life. It's a living church. It's a living faith. So just be open to the possibility that there, back in my little beady mind, my bald head, I say sometimes, I might be wrong in this, even though I have a doctorate in moral theology. So hermeneutic suspicion, but always the main point I would say to you, as you already mentioned, always, always, always serve the people.
Very good. My
prayer each morning is the ordained priesthood is to simply serve the baptized priesthood. And that's from St. John Paul II.
Your turn, Father Cole. What's a question you might have for Father Tony?
Sure. So even among people who aren't priests, just general in human life, we have peaks and valleys in our lives. We have high points and low points. The saints write about dry periods in their prayer. Question for you as a priest for several decades. How do you maintain joy in your priesthood, and especially in those times where it's very difficult?
I want to say, first off, I'm an expert in dry periods. But no, what you do, you rely upon faith. I mean, Jesus says, come to me, bring me your burdens, etc. And part of those burdens are sometimes, I don't think God's listening to me. I don't think God cares about me, etc. And if I'm going to be a minister to God's word, the good news, the charisma of whatever in people's lives, I have to take that upon myself. You cannot give, what's the old saying, nemo doc quod non habet. You cannot give what you don't have. And so you've got to be able to develop that. But I would say this to you, Cole. If you're going through one of those periods, you have now the experience that you can relate to other people who come to you. And they'll say, how did you do it, Father? Well, this is what I did, but now in your own life, looking at all your circumstance, whatever like that. Bottom line, it's faith. You've got to put your faith in God, especially when things are not going well. And realize, as Pope Francis said, the year of hope. We do have hope in God's love and mercy, which we don't own. We can't, we're not deserving of it, but God certainly takes care of his children. And it may be a while before you get to the point of answering your question. I bring up St. Monica. How many years, how many decades to get St. Augustine baptized? And she maintained that, persevered in that. So persevere is the main thing.
There is so much we could do if we just let the two of you talk to each other for a while, I suspect. But our show is limited. I want to ask you each one more question as we start to wrap up. And Father Tony, the question I have for you is as you think back over the decades you have served, any particular aha or that comes to mind or heart? And Cole, you can have a different kind of question. Tell us about what can the church expect of the new generation of priests? I don't mean that they're all the same. I know that, but what can we expect? Because it's a different generation than when Father Tony came through decades ago. So, Father Tony, you go first. You get
two big ahas. I was raised and served in the pre-Vatican Church, the Latin and whatever. I've had 6 years of Latin, all that good stuff. But the aha was when St. John 23rd brought about Vatican Council. I lived through that. We're studying the old tradition. We had to change right in the mid-stride and study the new traditions, etc. That was the first aha, because I found it so freeing, freed us up to be people who we are called to be the ministers of God's people. Second aha is when it hits, this comes with age. You'll one of these days experience this. When you get to the point, the aha is, it's time to pass the torch. I am no longer that 16-year-old kid looking at me in the mirror. I'm no longer the president of the Priest Council, all this good stuff I had in the past. It's now time to pass on to the next generation, to keep you in prayer and also to be a resource for whatever possibility we can be a resource for the coming generation.
Very good. Cole?
Right. I think a defining feature of my generation entering the priesthood is that we're not under delusions about what this is about. When I entered seminary in fall of 2018, Washington, D.C., Catholic University, that summer the Pennsylvania Report had just come out, and there had been a scandal surrounding then Cardinal McCarrick there. And I saw how that affected people in my seminary class, those above me. And so right at the beginning of seminary, I was kind of hit over the head with a brick that this life involves sacrifice. There's some really tough decisions to be made here. And if you're going to give yourself to this, you have to give it all and to be prepared for, potential blowback to these things. And so I don't want to end that on a negative note, but the inspiration is that what gets us through this is, true faith, as Father Tony's talking about, relying on our faith, relying on the person of Jesus. He's the only one that can get us through these things. And so I'm grateful that I entered in that context, because now I know, little could shock me this way, if anything. And that this is going to require, everything of me. So I think, my generation enters with that, and we enter with this knowledge, this understanding of what it's going to take to evangelize this culture where we are as a culture now. Because a lot of us have grown up in this culture that's largely secular, but we are still, maintaining our faith. And so we know that the application of the gospel is going to require some unique new tactics to evangelize in this age.
Listen, those are great answers to that question. I want to thank you both for being here, part of our What's New in ArchLou show. Father Tony, for all the years of service, as you mentioned, from priesthood, for ministry in parishes, for priest council, moral side. There's so many places you've been, and that you're still serving today. That's your real gift to this church. Father Cole, thank you for answering the call. As you break open your priesthood in front of all of us, we're grateful for your yes.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
And we thank you, our listeners, for tuning in to this edition of What's New in ArchLou. Join us again next month. We'll have new guests and a new show.